Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Anto Budiarjo, something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern to figure out the future for smart buildings. It's really good to have you with us today. In case you're wondering who we are, our profiles are linked on mondaylive.org, so head over there. And just to remind everybody that views expressed here in this hour are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's post comments and questions and chit chat on the Zoom chat, so we can make this as interactive as possible. And also, this deck is on mondaylive.org if you want any of the material that's on it. So this being January 2025, our focus is around the theme of Who Moved My Cheese? We started that conversation last week, which was very interesting and very engaging. So I want to continue that. And what we want to do after a little bit of sort of chit chat on news and trends is talk about who controls our cheese. So it's kind of a very sort of specific aspect of this in terms of discussing all of this cheesiness and some discussion around that. But before we go there, I'm going to hand it over to Ken for an update from automatedbuildings.com. Ken.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we provided a summary of last Monday's there. The cheese is moving, navigating the rapid pace of the change in the BAS industry. I think AI and Kelly did a good job of trying to capture the essence of that and linking it back to the actual YouTube. Yeah, interesting stuff. I think people are starting to get that message very clear. The next picture I've got there is the Linux Foundation creating a new era of opportunity. We've been chatting about it, and I felt compelled to try and let everybody understand a little bit better who is and what is the Linux Foundation. And as I wrote the article, I found it quite interesting because I was finding out a bunch of stuff I wasn't quite clear on. So lots of stuff. They've done a lot of work in the world kind of pulling this stuff together and are definitely the champions of open. Another article that came across from one of our contributing editors, Brian Collins, 4 ways smart contracts are revolutionizing building management. Kind of almost a different twist, using AI and embedding it in a contract, so the contract kind of interacts with you. So we're also always have, I guess there's a big piece of cheese, which is us getting paid for the contract, and the owner of the contract is expecting to get some kind of cheese as well. And I think it's talking a little bit about how that could be connected with an interactive AI relationship, and it kind of gets the mind thinking for sure. Another LinkedIn post that caught my attention is software as a service is dead, and this is the CEO of Microsoft chatting in an interview just before Christmas, and so it's old news. But it's an interesting concept, and what he's seeing in the quick thumbnail is that a lot of the services that we've actually created can actually be created on the fly with AI. That's me paraphrasing it, probably not quite right, but I think you get the gist of it. It's probably worth a read. Another one that caught my interest that I wanted to share with the group is how to become an AI engineer. And this is a fellow out of Oxford, over in Rogers country there. And I thought it was interesting because he's basically the curriculum for being an AI engineer. And I think it's worth a read because he talks about how the AI has to be tuned to the task that needs to be done. And it does a really good job that an AI engineer basically grabs all these AI tools and chooses the best tools and creates the best large language model he can for what it is he's doing. And I think Keith's kind of leading in our group that way, is he's experimenting with how can I control AI? I think that's the interesting thing, is sometimes AI is just looking at too many parameters, and we want it to just look at a few focused things. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. One of our sponsors actually wrote an article, How AI is Revolutionizing Traditional Models. And he gives some examples of how that's doing, mostly in the sequence of operation and stuff. So that's also worth a read. I'm a little prejudiced, so I want you to read everything in automated buildings, but you can understand my intent. Another one from one of our sponsors, and I'm very pleased with that, is no longer do we have to listen to what Ken's writing. There's a lot of opinion by all of our sponsors now, and they're working in real time as I am. So their posts are usually several days old, only several days old. Contractors don't wait to innovate. I think that's it. Doing nothing is not an option. So it's good, and to see what things you've got to jump right in right now for survival. So I think that's kind of the, of course, our AHR programs are evolving, and we're having the meetings, pulling down the final details and shuffling the last people into the sessions. It's going to be an exciting time. And as always, we put the titles up for all of these programs. We had to do that in July. And of course, by the time we move from July to February, the industry has shifted, and this year probably shifted even more. So there will be a lot of ad-libbing and a lot of new information brought into each one of the sessions. As you can see, the people that we're using are all actively involved in this moving target looking for the cheese. So back to you, Anto.
Thank you, Ken. On that SaaS is Dead article, I did read that over the Christmas break. And I would highly recommend that people read that. It's not actually saying what it's saying. I mean, it's a bit of a provocative title.
Yes.
Right. But the nuance of how he's saying it is actually matters a lot, because he's saying certain parts of the SaaS model, which is kind of what we think about it, is going to change significantly to be more AI, right? But that doesn't change the sort of the way of actually delivering, which is how we typically talk about it. So highly recommend it.
The other thing I found interesting, as one of the prime hosters of software as a service in the Azure, I think that's an interesting, the fact that he's actually saying that, because it's going to affect his business. I think he's basically thinking and his mouth is moving, which a lot of us do, and sometimes it's dangerous, but it's fun.
Yeah, good point. He saw the mouse has moved, so he repositioned.
Yeah, the way I was thinking is it's one of those things that our industry can skip. We can just move on to whatever the next one is.
Probably traditionally we can, but with so much involved in these changes, maybe we can actually take advantage of it. And
that's true. Pick it up at the end.
Right. So, Rick, do you want to tell us what's going on in Orlando? And
sure, we're kind of joking about the fact we're inside of 4 weeks now of when the summit will kick off on Sunday the 9th from 3 to 5, and the registration is up for that. And again, we're going to continue on from what the last couple of years have been, where we've been talking about what C4SB and Monday Live has been kind of up to relative to the industry. And a big part of that is going to be a conversation about how Linux is going to affect what we are doing, C4SB, and being part of Linux. We'll have Linux executives or executives there to kick off the Smarter Summit and talk about what the sort of the agenda and the scope of what the impact is intended to be for Linux coming into the building space, coming in through C4SB. And there will be an update of what's happening with the IBB, an update what's happening with some of the other work that Coalition has been doing, and then opportunity for a lot of different companies and individuals from those companies to be able to talk about what their involvement and their adoption. We're going to call it the adoption panel or something like that. So there'll be opportunity for a lot of different voices to talk about how they're leveraging the moving cheese, which we're going to say is embodied what's happening with Linux, and how to leverage Linux to keep track of the cheese, if nothing else. And then there will be we're going to have a watch party for the Super Bowl over at the Rosen Center, which is right next to the convention center. So it'll be easy walk over there. We don't know exactly how we're going to pay for that, but we're hoping to have that all figured out before y'all get there. But you're going to have to come to the summit to get any kind of freebies from the watch party. And then, we'll have a booth on the trade show floor. What's the booth number? 1190? Oh, there it is right in front of me. Booth 1190. Come by the Lawnmark booth. There'll be a group of us there every day of the show, and we're also participating in those panels. So I'm sure I went over my time, but a lot going on here in the next at AHR.
And there may be some cheese on the booth.
It's going to be cheesy, that's for sure.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Rick. The normal link board. Any other thoughts anybody want to bring up before we move on?
I wasn't on last week, but did you talk about the acquisition of BrainBox by Trane? Because that's quite an interesting.
It came up as part of the conversation. Somebody on chat brought it up.
Okay. Yeah, because effectively they're also buying a whole lot of customers that were connected through in the field, but BrainBox didn't get those. They acquired them from different companies, which is quite interesting. They've got about 14,000 sites that they acquired separately.
It was ABB. Yeah, ABB. They acquired that from ABB.
And Turntide, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to remark that Ken, that was a great overview. I got caught between on my way to down the 405, so I pulled off. I'm not driving right now, so I just pulled off because I really wanted to participate. But we're starting to see a focus on what we've been saying all along. Like, we don't have a large language model; we have a small language model. It doesn't. I don't know how many of you saw Danielle's post about, be like an AI flatworm, be like a flatworm with like 9 neurons. This thing only has 9 neurons in its brain, but it can, eat and all the other bodily functions that a worm needs to do and find food and defend itself. It only has 9 neurons. So, we're a kind of a small neural net or SNN. And we've got, not 9 neurons, but we probably got between 100,000 and 300,000 neurons in our brains to run a central plan. And so that makes it a little bit more palatable, because it's not going to turn into this, giant terminating machine that has all the wherewithal. It just knows how to run a chiller. It's not a general purpose. It's not AGI. So I'm glad to see that we kind of are moving past the hype and the fear and the trepidation of deploying AI.
Okay. Thanks, Keith. Anything else? Hearing none, so let us move on. So let's talk about cheese, and without getting cheesy, okay? So just as a reminder, this is all sort of based around the book, Who Moved My Cheese, and some of the quotes here is basically the quotes from the book. So it's all about change and being brave and sort of moving forward. The whole book is built around these 4 characters. And the way I kind of think about this month is that these 4 characters are sort of being part of this conversation in this Zoom call, which is why I did that, thanks to AI. And we want to focus today on who controls our cheese, which is sort of an interesting way to think about the changes. And I pose that the sort of a very specific question that we can ask is actually this, in terms of, do you control your cheese or does your cheese control you? So I'd love to open this up to the panel to discuss around this or around any sort of other aspects of controlling the cheese. So somebody want to start with some comment or angle? Sounds like not.
Well, I can start if you're that desperate for speakers. I guess I'm the cheese case where we display the cheeses. So I'm the reach in part of the industry along. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to display all the types of cheeses and opportunities that are out there and how people are capitalizing them. So that's the goal of automated buildings, to be the displayer and to allow you selection. So you can simply click on one of these that looks pretty interesting. And so I think, yeah, so I guess the cheese controls me.
Well, the change that you've gone through in the last couple of years from the sort of the old automated buildings is that you used to control all of that.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Now you've actually purposely made it so the community creates and therefore controls the cheese. So you're just an orchestrator, you're just a conductor, right? So
That's right.
the cheese has moved in your
Cheese
case.
salesman.
So I'll weigh in, as I said, I think last week, is that traditionally my focus has been around capitalizing on technological innovation. And I pointed out that the rate at which technology is evolving has increased or intensified compared to, say, a decade ago or 2 decades ago. And it's not only is it the speed changed, but the areas in which technology is emerging, technology are multiplying. So you could argue, you know, the first part of this century, there was such a primary focus on the internet, right? And that's been, and how to take advantage of the internet, that's been a topic for almost over 20, arguably almost 30 years, depending on how far back you want to go into the 90s. But right now, you've got parallel efforts going on in addition to the rate at which they're changing. And so so you've got, you know, AI as an example. You have the trend towards open standards, like the discussions we've had around the Linux Foundation. So those are 2 areas in particular that immediately come to mind. But you could argue there's additional ones as well. And cybersecurity is, we often mention that in terms of how to deal with cyber. So how do I feel about this? I feel like I'm in a reaction mode. I'm observing what's happening and having to react because the cheese is quickly, it's moving, and I'm getting hit not just one piece of cheese, but the multiple pieces of cheese, and saying, oh crap, which do I prioritize, or do I have to do all of them concurrently, right? And then how do I organize my business to effectively respond? And if I'm trading on the fact that my company prides itself in being a technology leader, okay, how do I pull that off in this new environment, right? Because I have to be concerned that I can't go out with a single message. Well, I'm really great at this, and they say, and the customer comes back and says, well, what about B and C? So I go out with A, and they say, what about B and C and D, right? So it's arguably a very challenging market relative to what we've had in past decades. And that's that's my response to your question, Otto.
Yeah, because there's just so much going on that all of those things that's going on that's changing is basically the cheese that is really not under your control.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I would say that, you know, Steve has mentioned technology, but that's something that we do here and we're comfortable with, and we've all been surfing those waves for 30 years. The problem now is so many other things are changing very quickly, like Office Armageddon and the, you know, disappearance of large numbers of customers or major changes in way people behave. The fact that there are no customers anymore, or the customers are diminishing, not because the problems are diminishing, but they don't have any people to talk to, right? So you have a lot of these other pieces of cheese that are moving that are not associated with technology, or they may be loosely coupled with technology trends, but they are very fundamental things that are changing very quickly right now.
You didn't use the word procurement, but that's presumably one of the thoughts behind your comment.
Well, I mean, there are editorials appearing, you know, in the New York Times directing Elon Musk and company to start working on federal procurement. I think that would be an excellent use of their time.
Yeah, I second that. I mean, wow, just seeing the engagement, especially with the economics being the way they are, I'm seeing more, you know, zero cost budget type of conversations like this. And I hate to say it, but I mean, the reality is that all energy management and efficiency and optimization are considered pretty much discretionary by most companies. I mean, seriously, it's optional. I just want to break the equipment when it breaks, when it's not running. You know, I'd love to do some energy management and optimization, but it's a zero cost budget. We have to go through they've got consultants going through their books, and everything has to be cost justified, real ROI. So yeah, it's making it very tough. I see entire segments like retail. I don't mind mentioning it, but yeah, we kind of, you know, stepped away from retailers because they don't have the budgets, they don't have the will. And it really isn't a big energy efficiency, just doesn't seem to be a big deal with them, contrary to what they, you know, pronounce on LinkedIn and et cetera. But yeah, reality is we got to follow the customers and
Keith,
procure the product.
Keith, don't you think they've kind of always paid lip service to the energy side of things because it's how much it actually affects their bottom line compared to their main business? It's not what they usually do.
That's it exactly, Roger. I mean, so you hear that it affects their bottom line, or it could affect it, but you always hear it's only 2% of my cost. Well, yeah, but you're only making 2 or 3% profit margin. So like, yeah. You know, it goes directly to the bottom line, and I've fought that battle for almost 20 years, and I'm just not willing to fight it anymore. So I'm moving upstream to the, you know, commercial, industrial, data center, prop tech, you know, every other area, but you know, the sweet spot that used to be retail.
But I think that's an indication too, Keith, of one of the other things that obviously is moving is the whole thing from the on-prem now to the cloud, and allowing other players in to actually offer things like space management and IAQ and all sorts of other stuff. Whereas it used to be all locked up and used to be on site, you had the supervisor, you had the, you know, and the controls and everything else all locked in on site. Now that's kind of moved, you know, the top end sort of morphing out to the cloud, but which is good because, you know, those 500 alarms that used to be on the PC that the electrician used to look after never used to get dealt with, whereas now hopefully it's getting put into the hands of people who know what to do with that information.
Yeah.
So I think that cloud trend is absolutely there. And Roger, to your point, you know, there never was any money for energy efficiency. That's why, you know, a lot of things are funded through utility rebates and other programs. But the key differentiator now is that the people, I think you mentioned this, the people that were in those roles no longer exist, right?
Right.
So as things have moved to the cloud, as other management systems have come in, as the world has changed, right? You don't need as much office space as you did anymore. So as these things have evolved, it's the people that are changing. And that's where I see the cheese moving.
Mm.
You know, the inevitable or long-term problem of people not really being that interested in energy efficiency, that hasn't changed.
Actually,
But
Nope.
nobody to talk to about it, that's changed.
Is that a change also for the boomers moving on as well, Jim, do you think?
I think so. I think so.
Actually, that's a good place. I want to jump in is the people are changing, and in the cheese story, he talks about that redefining the cheese often includes life balance, which is not a lot that anybody on this screen has actually done. They basically have gone headlong into the industry full time. So we're starting to see that, and the fact you can work remote and just that whole change. And then the other thing we've got laying on top of that is that we're short of talented people. We're having a talent problem, and these people who are redefining their cheese as to be software people working remote. And then this other one that kind of phones into that is Rick's crusade on the Linux. And what there is there's a whole bunch more Linux people who want to live that balanced lifestyle and support us. And so they're hanging out there in the clouds, and they're willing to give us a piece of their time, not so much their soul, but a piece of their time. And the open software kind of is very susceptible to that. And they like the idea that they can pound out a piece of code that might be used by Uber, Delta Airlines, and the air conditioning industry. So all of a sudden it becomes more valuable for them to spend time developing that piece, and it becomes people are not so much interested in the whole cheese. I think people are interested in just the little pieces of the cheese.
So Rick, how do you frame the Linux Foundation in terms of cheese moving?
Well, the Linux Foundation has always been about community-based solutions, and it's been kind of this for a while. I guess it was probably thought of as like an outlier because, well, if you want a real solution, you have to go to a big company that has the entire solution, top to bottom, supported top to bottom, all of that. And that's the way we've thought about things. That's the way we've thought about this industry for a long time. That's not the way the younger generation thinks about anything, nothing. You don't go to a single vendor for anything anymore. So a younger generation that thinks about composability or being in control of their own destiny just naturally looks for open source or open community-based things, and they just plain don't look to a single walled garden vendor. It's not that the walled gardens were evil. It's just that the mentality of looking to one single vendor for 40 years and 20 years in a gold watch, well, 40 years in a gold watch, whatever. Nobody looks at coming out of college and going to work for a company and staying there for 20 or 30 years. Nobody looks at going and getting one brand of anything. The expectations are just different. And the Linux Foundation absolutely embodies that. It's less tidy and neat and all packaged. It's a little bit messier, and it's a little bit less, the pieces aren't all tied together for you. If you want that, you can go to IBM called Red Hat and you can get the supported version. But the Linux Foundation in itself and what it does is kind of this messy, roll your own, compose your own solution. And if you're an innovator or younger and you think that way, then everything about the Linux Foundation is perfectly compatible with that. Of course, the cheese is moving. Of course it is. And the best way to keep track of it and keep your finger on the pulse is to be associated with other people who think that way. And that's where So the other thing is workforce. You know, it used to be that you could hang out a shingle and you get people to come to work for your big company because people wanted to work for the big company where all the resources were, where all the innovation was happening, and where all the retirement funds were being collected. It doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't. People want to work with open source, newest, best of breed. They want to have flexibility inside to define their own job, work from home, whatever. And everything about the Linux Foundation is 100% compatible with that. So there's just all these different dynamics that for one reason or another, the Linux Foundation just finds itself in a nice sweet spot of that. So we will be promoting that. We're also talking to the largest companies that are in our industry about how we can support them to be more responsive to what they are seeing as their customers. And believe me, that those conversations are going well. So a lot of people are seeing the changing dynamics and they're saying, we can't just keep our feet in the sand or, buried in hold things back. We have to adjust. We have to acknowledge that the cheese has moved, and how do we play into that rather than deny or try and hold back. Anyway, I'll yield back my soapbox.
If I can jump in for a moment. Whoops, I'm still muted.
Go. You're good.
I'm good now? Okay. I just posted on chat. What we did 5 years ago is we had that session on open hardware, open software. We were kind of heading in that direction. It was the early days of Raspberry Pis, and we had a bunch of young folks, and we filled a room at AHR. It was much like a college thing. We not only filled the room, we filled the floor, and we had people lined up all the way around it. We probably broke the fire code, but there was an opening. We're talking about a variance of moving away from proprietary hardware and proprietary software. And that was 5 years ago, believe it or not. And that has evolved. And ironically enough, through no wisdom of ourselves, these new microcomputers have chose Linux as their base systems. And now I predict there's going to be a collision of this kind of home hobbyist that the best part of a revolution is if everybody can be involved in the revolution, and we're certainly heading towards a revolution. And what it allows, and I think Rick just did a great job of open the vision on what's happening with the people who are going to motivate this. And not only have they got the skill set and the mindset and the life quality blend, they now have very economical non-industry devices that they can build it on. So they can bring their dream completely built with an AI relationship. And also, I think the biggest trend going forward now is personalized AI, or I don't know what to call it, but basically AI that just deals with the situation we have to deal with. I think, Keith, last Monday you did a thing is with AI, the chiller asks the pump, give me some chilled water. Are you providing me chilled water? Now I will start. All of a sudden, the sequence of operation starts to move out of a sequence of operation into an AI relationship. That AI relationship doesn't need to be that complex. You can basically train that large. I think we're heading towards small language models rather than large language models.
Dan, that's exactly it. So the purest programming language from an object-oriented perspective is called Smalltalk, and that was the whole. And that was
called the what?
Smalltalk.
Smalltalk. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Everybody will agree with that. But they were the ones they invented object. It was pure. It was so pure. You couldn't even start programming unless you defined all your objects and classes and all that stuff. And yeah, that was it. A bunch of small objects collaborating with each other. I remember in the 90s, we were working on some stuff at Honeywell, and that relationship that you just mentioned, you know, the chiller needs the pump to start, the pump needs its power, and everything. These little small objects are only concerned with what, you know, how to be a pump. A pump wants to be a pump, and all it needs is power, and it can pump, and you know, that sort of thing. So you got this kind of cataclysm effect where they just kind of domino effect where all this stuff interacts with each other. And it's very powerful. I mean, it's very powerful, especially when you start talking about biomimicry and stuff like that.
And it's also very composable, which is what Rick was
It's-
talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you're breaking it down to the most granular sort of relationship components.
Composition is one of the tenets of object-oriented design. That's exactly it, Anto. So, yeah, I mean, and then plus, and furthermore, the kids, I called them the Nintendo kids, and I've been saying this for 20 years. I think I was a little bit premature because 20 years ago, I was like, well, the Nintendo kids are really running these buildings right now. I think it was a little bit premature, but I actually got a chance to talk to a Nintendo kid. He was 29. I'll call him Brian. He was over a supermarket chain, and he had just inherited the job from the facility director. The old one, he had retired. He was literally twice his age. So the old one, the other guy, the retired guy was 62, 63, and Brian was 29. And he came in, and he doesn't have all this, you know, information making him become biased or anything. So I remember we were talking about refrigeration cycles, for example. He's like, why do we have, the first thing he asked was, why do we have up to 10 to 12 refrigeration defrost cycles per 24-hour period? And the old mechanic is there like, well, no, it's necessary. He's like, no, the manual, I'm looking at the OEM manual of this case, and it says that you should only do 3 in a 24-hour period. Well, that's because you don't understand. He's like, no, the manual says 3, you need to go fix it. And that was it. I mean, he just said, we're going to have 3 or 4. We're going to go back to the spec. And I don't care what you're saying about how nuanced it is with your little piece of equipment, but I know that 10 to 12 defrost cycles per 24-hour period is not good for energy nor the product, which we're so worried about, you know, melting. How about freezing it and melting it 12 times a day? You know, it destroys it. So actually, I think I mentioned this before about how more ice cream gets ruined through defrost cycles, numerous defrost cycles, than melting. And we actually have grocery stores throwing away product because they're defrosting their cases too much.
Because they don't want to clean their coils.
Yeah. But don't melt it. That's all. Just don't melt the ice cream. That's where you lose product. No, they're losing it from improper operation and maintenance, to your point.
So
Actually, that would be an interesting scenario there, just that you're talking about, is somewhere in that loop, one of the AI devices would identify that it is not operating properly because it's dirty and not operating to spec. And then it would suggest that, you know, that maybe we should pull down some of these defrost cycles. I mean, it could be self-healing.
Yeah.
So tapping into what Rick mentioned earlier, a couple of minutes back, about Linux and the open side of things, and sort of tying that to the sort of control topic that we're talking about. If one is selling or using or otherwise your cheese is something that is a proprietary closed garden cheese, let's call it that, then the cheese is controlling you, right? And if you have in contrast to that, this is what Rick is talking about. If you have open and you have composable bits that can come from all different vendors that you know will be interoperable with each other, then you are controlling your cheese, meaning you're controlling what you're doing. Is that a good way of thinking about this in terms of the control of the cheese? Because does that make sense, or is that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's the last stronghold that's getting weakened. I mean, let's go back to grocery and refrigeration. Like, there's three main vendors. We all know the names of the big three. Not BACnet compatible, not open, and they've been like that for 40 years. But what happens when somebody figures out how to connect to your proprietary refrigeration management control system? You know, that there's no concept of a BACnet open protocol in that entire industry. And retail would be a close second, you know, with their proprietary. So really, we're in this kind of almost echo chamber in the commercial and prop tech area where we have open tritium systems and stuff like that. But you venture out to retail, grocery, or fast food restaurants, they don't even have the notion of being open. So what do? You got to deal with them and meet them where they're at, because they haven't been open for 30 years, and it doesn't seem like they're moving in that direction. So, you know, what do? And that's they're controlling their cheese, Anto. That's it.
Yeah, those vendors are controlling the cheese. So
Yeah.
the people, the installers, integrators, and building owners and users don't have any. The cheese is being controlled by their cheese is being controlled by others.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's getting stale. Smells bad.
So how does
No, it's a little bit of that whole, am I controlling it or is it controlling me? Is that you kind of go back to the personality of the younger generation. You do have to take control of your own destiny. And it's not like you have to, it's just you do now. That's just the way you think. It's like, oh gosh, I used to let the company tell me when I could take vacation and when I could whatever. It doesn't work that way anymore. So it's not a change for the newer generation. It's not a change at all. That is just how it is. So composability and being in control of your own destiny works because it's not a change. The cheese hasn't moved for them. The cheese has always been that way. For us, older folks, although some of us lived, I digress. For us, a lot of us, it's a change from an old way of thinking to, oh my gosh, now I have to think about this new way. And I guess that's the point, is think about it from the 20-year-old and the 30-year-old. It's never been the cheese has not been controlling them. They've grown up realizing that they have to compose their own future. And that's just how it's been.
That's true,
Yeah.
but they've also grown up in a time, Rick, where there's been no money ever for anything, as Keith has pointed out, right? I mean, you're the older generation had some degrees of freedom where there was growth, at least
Yep.
new construction, there was capital available. So, you know, if you were to do a persona for the young guy that is taking over, how was he schooled, right? What you have is a lot of baby boomers that held on, you know, with an iron fist to the last bit of power until they retired without grooming the generation after them. A generation that grew up with 0 degrees of freedom in terms of money, maybe complete degrees of freedom in terms of thinking about how to do things differently. But, you know, no Bucks, no Buck Rogers. Where are those young people going to get the cash to do anything interesting?
I don't see any pessimism from the youngsters at all.
Good.
That's one of that's one of the reasons I kind of like hanging out with, you know, my kids and their friends and younger, is that they're not pessimistic about the future at all. Not at all. They're optimistic about not being restrained or being told what they have to do or how they get things done. And
Yeah.
it's a change. But again,
And
how much time are you spending talking with the ones that are optimistic? They're not down in the dumps about their future opportunities.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's unacceptable to them to be any other way. Like, what are you talking about is closed and proprietary? Like just to close the loop on my friend Brian, he had legacy refrigeration equipment and Microthermal. To their credit, they came out with a LAN-based interface, LNS, and it was a smart server compatible. And he did the unthinkable. He went through, he's like, this is unacceptable. I can't manage what I can't control. So he ripped out all the legacy controllers across all 400 of their supermarkets and put in microthermal because of their LAN interface, and kept on trucking. And then he wrote the app. He wrote a LNS app on a Python machine and sent it to us. This is in another life at Phoenix, and he sent us. He's like, here's the Raspberry Pi. This is this thing called Lawnmark. I can interface to it. Here's a demo program. I mean, he handed it to us on a silver platter. We didn't even have to start off from scratch. But he was willing to bite that bullet. He's like, it's unacceptable. I don't care what this legacy equipment is. This is ridiculous. I can't manage this because I can't control it. What do you mean it's not open? That's ridiculous. And he convinced his people at this major supermarket chain to rip out all that old, insert the 3 vendors here. And they went to microthermal.
You're muted.
Sorry, he was able to convince them to come up with the money.
Yeah, because he said, I can't manage it.
Right. That's a great story. Hope they're more like
And
it.
talking about this sort of next generation, I think we often forget that they're basically our kids. They're the kids of boomers,
Yep.
right? So if we think they're doing anything wrong, which I don't think any of us are, it's basically our fault.
It helps if they never listened in the first place, is what I'm learning.
There you go. Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
David, do you want to chime in any of this?
Really there are 2 points. The first, I want to party with Brian.
Whoever he is.
Whoever Brian really is. So Keith, if you can set that up, I'm going to buy the first 3 rounds.
Okay.
Because there aren't enough of him around. And the second thing is I've been on a completely different angle studying, what's holding our housing back from being built and this housing crisis we're experiencing across the country. And one of the, Chicago's in a really bad place right now. And as I was getting deeper into the rabbit hole, I was researching the former Mayor Rahm. And when Rahm was in Obama's White House as his first chief of staff, he is famous for being quoted as saying, "Never let a good crisis go to waste."
All-time favorite.
And yeah, and all of this cheese talk, the thing I'm looking at is there are impending crises that will be happening because of the inflection point the industry is in on so many levels across office, retail, industrial, and housing. And we're going to be confronting new crises that we haven't necessarily confronted before. One is the shortage of staff, trained staff with expertise in controls. And this is not just BMS, it's lighting, it's shade, it's AV, it's multimedia, it's security, it's elevator controls, on and on and on. This crisis is across all controls industries where there aren't necessarily folks going into the field from an engineering standpoint or from a trade school standpoint, and folks are aging out. And the guy who was cycling the defrost 12 times a day, those guys, some of them are bad, some of them are really good, but they're all retiring. And so we have this slow moving crisis that will become existential if it hasn't already to some organizations. And to me, the best thing we can do is be prepared with the new solutions to solve for these crises. And I think we are doing that in many ways, but I I think there are larger macro scale forces at work, like staffing and things like that. And I think there are massive opportunities that we need to keep tracking, so the solutions we're building and the interoperability we're striving for addresses these crises as they become acute for different organizations.
So that we are aware of how the cheese is moving, those cheese that we don't control. So that's a way of controlling it.
Yeah, think of a quarterback who's throwing the ball where the receiver is going to be. We need to aim for that spot, not where the industry is now, where it's going to be.
That was Gretzky, and it was a puck, just for the record.
Oh, I didn't want to mix my fucking metaphors. Sorry. We never want to let a good puck crisis go to waste.
So where do we go with this? We haven't heard from you, Roger, in terms of how cheese is moving in the UK and the European market. You're muted.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's no difference. You know, this is a global sort of business now. You know, players reach out across the world, and exactly what David was talking about. Every company I've been talking to recently is struggling with people shortages. They really are. I mean, they'd love to expand, but they haven't got the people to do it. And it is a concern. And I think there is a push, and I know Mark's not here, but there is a push, I think, where people are thinking a little bit more about, you know, going to the edge to get more data, because ultimately, you know, all the cloud services and AI and everything can only get their data from two sources. It's either they go out and get it from the internet, or they get it from real-time solutions. And the real-time bit is what we've been talking about. And I think that intelligence now, because it can go down to the microcontroller from the microprocessor, I think Linux has a problem down at that level, but it's, you know, things will get smarter. I mean, that word sort of that came in and out was IoT for a while, but sort of getting down much lower as you make it much more intelligent, and you are getting the, you know, things like we talked about earlier, space management. You can come along and get a very small tile, put it under a desk or put it somewhere and pick up people movement, temperatures, and other things. So I think the feeding of data is really quite important. If systems are gonna survive, and you know, Keith's AI stuff needs real-time data. You know, it's all very well having all the key data, but I think we are seeing some movement in terms of acquisitions. I'm beginning to see companies beginning to think a lot more about now in our industry of kind of moving down. I think the office dilemma still isn't actually resolved. You know, the office is still empty on Monday and Friday and full on Wednesday. You know, kind of thinking that the building's empty for 4 days a week almost. And how do you manage that? And that's ultimately being done by people sort of moving buildings and then controlling how their staff get in and out by having them register that they're coming in. Which then goes back to the fact that the whole real estate thing means that leases are getting shorter and the turnover is getting quicker. And so therefore, from an industry point of view, we're still going to see a lot more work generated, because the building's going to have to be repurposed to actually be more multi-tenanted and things. So it's all these things we've all been talking about that are happening, and they really are happening. You know, this is not just makeup, and we're seeing it more and more, that all the things we've been talking about for a few years now are beginning to happen. But I think the one thing that doesn't seem to move for me still is Jim's old chestnut, is the procurement change with the mechanical contractors and the things there. It's a real nut to crack in terms of how do you change it to take advantage of all those things that we've been mentioning. And I think that's the frustrating thing still for a lot of people at the moment, is that procurement change.
We're coming up to the top of the hour. Steve, do you want to sort of try and recap some of this? Or Ken, if you want.
So I think what's good is that we got a broad range of reactions to the effect of the cheese moving, and every position, Jim, or Greg, or Keith, or Roger, or me is taking is valuable. Is a valuable slice on what's happening, right? But it really does point to the fact that there's a lot going on with the cheese right now, right? Both technologically and from a procurement standpoint. Although arguably, as Roger just pointed out, and Jim talks about regularly, it's not happening at the procurement level in a meaningful way. So even though, Keith, you've seen an example where it has improved, potentially, overall, it's still an issue, a significant issue.
Oh, that was an anomaly. I'm
Right.
serious. That's 1 out of 1,000. Yeah.
Yeah,
seriously.
exactly. So, I wonder, maybe for a future discussion, is because of the construction cycle of how procurement is generally controlled, if automation was sold as a service directly to the owner, as opposed to going through mechanicals and GCs and so on, and we stepped outside of that whole process and sold a service that was inclusive of material, labor, software, all of it, right? That the owner would buy and would subscribe to, then do you have an opportunity to stand outside the whole process and re-envision the way automation is purchased?
I think that's an interesting concept. I wonder if the name might change to automation as an intelligence rather than as a service. There's some room for evolution there, I think, in the fact that what we've in the past have looked at software as a service, that is rapid. That's one of those pieces of cheese that's also melting into a puddle. So I think we have to kind of just keep those options open. But I think you're quite correct in the analogy.
And I go back to that SaaS's dead article that Satya published that you were talking about, Ken.
Yeah.
The crux of what he's saying is that the applications that typically is what you think about SaaS is going to go, and it's going to be replaced by AI. But where the data comes from in his world, databases, in our world, real-time systems, which is really the data sources, that doesn't change. That layer doesn't change, and in fact, it's very much required, because you can't do any computation either with application or with AI unless you have the data. Imagine that, which is the point that I think Ken made that several months ago, that we are the arms of the eyes and arms of AI.
Yeah, I just wedged that article in chat as the last chat entry there. So if anybody wants to, I think it is important that everybody reads the same information and then we share it rather than one person reading the information and sharing it. And that's our intent at Automated Buildings.
That's cool. So let's bring this to a wrap. It's been a good conversation, talking about cheese, and the video of this will be up tomorrow. I hope everybody has a good week, and we'll come back next week and figure out some other angle to talk about cheese and how things are changing in our industry. So thank you very much, panelists, and thanks everyone for joining us, and bye-bye all.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Cheers.
you.
Hey, guys.